all that missed, we're going to have to back up.
I listened to it.
Oh,
There
well,
go.
okay. All right. We're going to have to back up a little
There'll be
bit.
no backing up. Everyone needs to listen to it.
Well, there you go. If you missed, you're required to watch it on YouTube.
Yeah. Listen to it. It's on there.
And then send a report.
We ain't backing up. It took us long enough last week.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's true. Well, we only did the one chapter, and it went pretty quick. So today we're going to do 2 chapters, because I think we're going to be able to get through 3 and 4 today. Esther chapter 3. But I have to back up for those that weren't here, because I got to lay this groundwork for chapter 3 to make some sense. So now, before I begin too much in depth, how many generations back do you know of your family? 4? I think I can think of 4. So what would that be? Maybe 150 years?
I wasn't here.
Kay's really thinking. So however many years that is. 200 years. All right. 200 years. I know back to my great-great-great-grandfather, but I don't know anything prior to that. And I really don't know anything of what he did. I'm saying all this to make some type of point here. I want us to look at, and those that were here last week know what I'm going to talk about here. So when we get to, let's look at chapter 2, verse 21 first. I want to lay this groundwork, and then that'll give us the context for chapter 3 and 4. So you missed last week. Esther is queen. She has been chosen to be queen to replace Vashti that we talked about in chapter 1. We do know that Esther is a Jew. She is now a queen to a Persian king, all right? Mordecai here in verse 21 is her uncle that has adopted her as his daughter because her parents have passed. And so in some way, Mordecai is a father figure to Esther, all right? That gets us caught up. So after Esther is chosen to be queen, let's look at verse 21 of chapter 2. In those days, while Mordecai sat at the king's gate, 2 of the king's chamberlains, Bigthan and Teresh, of those which kept the door, were wroth, and sought to lay hand on the king Ahasuerus. And the thing was known to Mordecai, who told it to Esther the queen, and Esther certified the king thereof in Mordecai's name. And when an inquisition was made of the matter, it was found out. Therefore they were both hanged on a tree, and it is written in the book of the Chronicles before the king. Now these 3 verses are going to be very, very important later on in this book of Esther. But Mordecai finds or hears of this plot to assassinate the king. Mordecai gets word to the king through Esther that there's a plot to be had, and the 2 that are involved are executed for their plot to kill the king. All right? Everybody okay with that? This is very important for later on in the book, and I don't want us to forget about that. Okay? Now, that gets us to chapter 3. This incident has happened. And perhaps there's been a matter of a few years have passed between chapter 2, verse 23, and chapter 3, verse 1. We don't know how many years, but probably 3 or 4, maybe, just guessing. And if I did them, well, yeah, it's been 4 years. I see it right here. I got it written down right here in front of me. All right? Everybody okay so far? That's the scene. Now we're beginning in Esther chapter 3, verse 1.
Esther 3. After these things did King Ahasuerus promote Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, and advanced him, and set his seat above all the princes that were with him.
Okay, I need to explain all of this to get us started. Haman was an Agathite. Now, we talked last week when we closed our class about the descendants of Agag. Amalekites, well, Agag was king of Amalek. The Amalekites were sworn bitter enemies of the Hebrews. From this point here, going back 1,000 years to the time when the Amalekites attacked the Hebrews, the weakest of the Hebrews, and we read about that last week in Exodus chapter 17. But the Amalekites have always been at odds and enemies of the Israelites. And we'll go back from this point here 1,000 years. Now, I mentioned our ancestors. I don't know anything about my ancestors from 200 years ago, let alone 1,000. But this animosity between the Amalekites and the Hebrews is going to be played out here in chapter 3 for something that happened 1,000 years ago and for something that happened 600 years ago from this point. That's a lot of animosity to hold a grudge, for a family to hold a grudge. But Haman is a descendant of Agag, which was an Amalekite king. Okay? Everybody okay with that? I'm laying a groundwork here. That's why I want us to understand that. Now, Haman, we're going to find out, is a descendant of King Saul. God had given King Saul a command that he was to kill all of the Amalekites and Agag some 600 years ago, and that's recounted in 1 Samuel chapter 15. King Saul is not obedient in that command and allows some of the Amalekites to escape, and King Agag ends up getting killed, but I'm not going to go into all that. But this animosity from the families of Agag and the family of Kish, or Saul, is still brewing here. All right. Got that down? Now let's move forward, verse 2.
And all the kings, the servants that
That's
were
loud,
in the king's gate, bowed and reverenced Haman. For the king had so commanded concerning him. But Mordecai bowed not, nor did him reverence.
So we see Haman was promoted for some reason, we don't know, but he was promoted, and all these folks were going by and reverencing and bowing toward Haman, but Mordecai didn't. Now, we don't know why Mordecai didn't. Perhaps Mordecai knew how evil Haman really was. Perhaps it was animosity because he was a descendant of Agag, or he was an Amalekite. We don't know, but we do find here that Mordecai did not bow nor give him reverence. Okay? Now, again, the two families from centuries prior had been bitter enemies. Okay? And so perhaps the animosity still carries some 600 years, 1,000 years later. Okay? Verse 3.
Then the king's servants which were in the king's gate said unto Mordecai, Why transgressest thou the king's commandment? Now it came to pass, when they spake daily unto him, and he hearkened not unto them, that they told Haman, to see whether Mordecai's matters would stand. For he had told them that he was a Jew. And when Haman saw that Mordecai bowed not, nor did him reverence, then was Haman full of wrath.
So word gets back to Haman that Mordecai is a Jew, and he's not bowing. Haman gets pretty ticked off about this. Not only is he not bowing to me, but he's a Jew. Now, I don't know whether Haman knew prior to this engagement here, whether he knew Mordecai was a Jew. He might have, I don't know. But we see here that once the matter of him not bowing and reverencing Haman came to Haman, he got full of wrath, it says there. Now, this whole incident is going to be played out throughout the rest of the book of Esther, so I don't want us to miss these details here. So Haman is mad at Mordecai. He's full of wrath toward Mordecai. Okay? Verse 6.
And he thought scorn to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they had shown him the people of Mordecai. Wherefore Haman sought to destroy all the Jews that were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus, even the people of Mordecai.
So not only now is Haman mad at Mordecai, he wants to kill all of the Jews. Now, we don't know how many Jews were in the province of Persia at this time. There may have been 1 million. I don't know, just throwing out a number. But Haman's plot here is to kill them all. Partly because he's mad at Mordecai for not bowing to him. But then he finds out there are all these Jews, which again, animosity brewing from 600 years ago when the Jews essentially annihilated the Amalekites. And we looked at what? Exodus 17, Deuteronomy 25, 1 Samuel 14, 1 Samuel 15, 1 Samuel 27, and 1 Samuel 30. All of these incidences of Amalekites and the Hebrews fighting each other. But again, all the way back to Exodus has been 1,000 years ago. And the events in 1 Samuel happened 600 years ago. I don't know. I can't. Can you imagine holding a grudge that long? Passed down from generation to generation to generation? I mean, we see it played out here in Esther, but, I maybe not in our own personal lives, but perhaps, well, I mean, look at the Arabs and the Israelites now, I mean, all these conflicts. Nevertheless, but I want us to understand that Mordecai is not necessarily the only one that's going to receive or be planned to receive the wrath of Haman. It's going to be the entire Jewish population that's in Persia. All because Mordecai didn't bow down. Verse 6.
In the first
7.
month,
Oh,
that is
7.
the month Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, they cast pur, that is, the lot before Haman from day to day, and from month to month, to the 12th month, that is, the month Adar. And Haman said unto King Ahasuerus, There is a certain people scattered abroad, and dispersed among the people in all the provinces of thy kingdom. And their laws are diverse from all people, neither keep they the king's laws. Therefore it is not for the king's profit to suffer them. If it please the king, let it be written that they may be destroyed. And I will pay 10,000 talents of silver to the hands of those that have the charge of the business, to bring it into the king's treasuries.
All right, so going back to verse 7. In the first month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, that is 474 BC. This casting of pur, or this lot, so the Persians especially, and even some in the Jewish community, would cast dice, and they would get their decisions made by the rolls of the dice, or voting, or by reaching in and pulling out a card, like, okay, choice number 1 is what we're going with. That's the way. Magic 8 Ball, yeah. Oh, Alexa showed up. Well, you were quiet.
She's been barking over here.
Oh, I didn't even hear. I'm all hyped up about Mordecai and Haman. So they're casting lots to see when this slaughter, this execution of all the Jews will take place. Now, by the Lord's providence, when they cast the die, it was 11 months. So almost an entire year was going to pass before this decree, or this wish that Haman had, was going to take place. And that came up in the 12th month, the month Adar. So it was going to be an entire year that Haman was going to have to plan for the assassination or the execution of all the Jews in the Persian provinces, 127 provinces. That's what verse 7 is telling us there. So he goes to the king Ahasuerus there in verse 8. There are certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the people of all the provinces of thy kingdom, and their laws are diverse from all the people. Neither keep they the king's laws, nor it is not for the king's profit to suffer them. What Haman is saying is, there are this group of people scattered throughout the entirety of your land that do not obey your laws. Now that was a lie, because in no time that I have ever studied do we see here that the Jews were rebelling at all against the Persians. Now, could that have been happening? I suppose, but I don't. In all of my study for all of this entirety of, from talking about Daniel and Ezra, and what I know from Jeremiah and Isaiah, I don't really necessarily see that the Jews have in any way rebelled completely against the king's laws that they were living under. Now, we do know that Daniel didn't want to eat the meat from the king, but he only requested that. And we do see that the 3 Hebrews, the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, weren't going to bow down to the king, but God was showing in that his providence in caring for them. But we don't see a widespread rebellion of the Jews against the people they were living under. All right? So when Haman goes to Ahasuerus to say, there's a whole group of people that are going against your laws, that was a lie. And it says there, it is not for the king's profit to suffer them or to allow them. Now again, all this is the plot for Haman to kill all of the Jews in all 127 provinces of Persia. And he asks there in verse 9, if it please the king, let it be written that they may be destroyed. And Haman says, I will pay 10,000 talents of silver to the hands of those that have the charge of the business. 10,000 talents, I looked this up the other day, 10,000 talents of silver was $672 million worth in today's prices. Now, where was Haman going to get that kind of money? From the Jews that were killed. Yeah. Now, notice, he didn't tell the king what group of people this was, or what exactly they were doing against the king's commands. He just said there's a group of people in your provinces that are going against your commands, and it's not worth your trouble to allow them to continue to live. That's what Haman is saying here. He says, and anybody that's involved in the execution of these people, I will pay them $672 million. That's a lot. That's a lot of money. I don't know, huh? Yeah. Yeah, well, that's true. If you offer that much of a bounty, there's going to be people that are going to be happy to do this. Yeah. They don't mean anything to me. Now, remember, at this point, Ahasuerus, the king, is married to a Jewish woman, Esther. Now, again, Haman doesn't tell Ahasuerus that these people that I'm talking about are the descendant or the family, your people, the people of your queen, Esther. He doesn't tell him all that. He just says there's a group of people that need to be executed, and I'll pay this large sum to have them all done. Verse 10.
And the king took his ring from his hand, and gave it unto Haman the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, the Jews' enemy. And the king said unto Haman, The silver is given to thee, the people also, to do with them as it seemeth good to thee.
Now, right here, it doesn't seem to me like Ahasuerus is very smart. Now, I will say that this shows a lot of trust in Haman. I mean, he has promoted Haman, right, to the position that he's in. And so if Haman has this idea that this group of people needs to be put away, then perhaps for the king's sake, he got to trust his men. But instead of looking into it further or getting more information, he just gives Haman as the king's ring, the signet that says whatever happens, as long as it's stamped with the king's ring, it's real. And then the silver here that's given to Haman is essentially the king blesses this job with the treasury of the king to pay the expenses needed to execute this plot. The king is all on board without really knowing anything about what's going on. But we see here this plot from Satan to execute all of the Jews is slowly gathering speed. Keep in mind that this was not all on Haman. This was a plot from Satan. If he could extinguish the Jews, there would be no Christ. And so King Ahasuerus, oblivious to the entirety of it all, said, okay, whatever you want to do. Now, the king, remember, has had several defeats against Greece, and so perhaps he may just be at this point pretty aloof to just think, well, hey, whatever you guys want to do. We've lost half our men in battle against Greece. I don't want to pursue anything, but if you guys want to, have at it. That might have been why he had this attitude. I don't know, just throwing it out there. Verse 12.
Then were the king's scribes called on the 13th day of the first month, and there was written according to all that Haman had commanded unto the king's lieutenants, and to the governors that were over every province, and to the rulers of every people of every province according to the writing thereof, and to every people after their language, in the name of King Ahasuerus was it written, and sealed with the king's ring. And the letters were sent by posts into all the king's provinces to destroy, to kill, and to cause to perish all Jews, both young and old, little children and women, in one day, even upon the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month Adar. and to take the spoil of them for a prey.
So the plot is now in motion. The king's, verse 12, the king's scribes on the 13th day of the first month, so 13 days roughly after the initial thought to do this, letters were sent out with the king's signet and throughout all the provinces of Persia, that all of the Jews, young and old, were going to be killed. And that was going to be on March 7th, 473 BC. So you got about 11 months, and all this is going to happen. And notice it says there, it was in every province, according to every people in their language, and it was written and sealed with the king's ring. Keep in mind, at this point, Haman has the ring. This is not from the king, although you could say it was, because the king gave his ring to Haman. But the king didn't write this. This was all Haman. Verse 13, and the letters were sent to the king's provinces, all 127. Notice what it says there. To destroy, to kill, and to cause to perish all Jews, young and old, little children, and women, in one day. This slaughter was to take place in one day. And it was to happen on the 12th month, with the 13th day of the 12th month, which, according to experts, was March 7th, 473 BC. This is from the king, right? It's got the king's ring. Verse 14.
The copy of the writing for a commandment to be given in every province was published unto all people, that they should be ready against that day. The posts went out, being hastened by the king's commandment, and the decree was given in Shushan the palace. And the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city Shushan was perplexed.
All right, so we see that the letters went out to be ready. Again, they've got about 11 months to prepare. The decree went out, and it says the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city was perplexed, because all along the Jews had been essentially living peacefully among the people. So why all of a sudden this great urge to kill every one of them? So the city doesn't understand, and I'm going to say the entirety of the kingdom of Persia. What's this all about? But again, I don't believe that King Ahasuerus really fully understood what he had signed. Haman, of course, thinks he's going to get off with, hey, I'm finally going to get rid of all the Jews. But the city, the province, I'm going to say, or the provinces, just, they don't have it. Why all of a sudden are we going to do this? Yes. Well, because that's where the king and Haman were. I mean, that was the capital. That's where the epicenter of all this was. Yeah. Even though it affected the entirety of the kingdom, it's not unlike, Washington, D.C. You can talk about Washington, D.C., but you could also then refer to the entirety of the country because of the policies that come out of there. So, yeah. Yeah. Anybody got any other questions about chapter 3? I don't know. Probably. But I really don't know right off the top of my head whether he knew that Esther was a... But again, at this point, the animosity that this Amalekite has against the Hebrews, I just want them all dead. Now, again, I'm not going to read the... again, if you want to look them up later, Exodus 17, Deuteronomy 25, 1 Samuel 15, and 1 Samuel 27. These recount the strife that the two had against each other. And God told King Saul, kill all of them. And he didn't do it. So because of the disobedience of Saul, some 600 years prior, we now have here Haman seeking revenge and going to kill all the Jews. But God's got other plans, as we know. He's got one on the inside. As Lee said, he's got one on the inside. Queen Esther, which we're going to read about here beginning in chapter 4. Now, chapter 4 is quickly following chapter 3. There's not necessarily any length of time because we only have 11 months total between the edict and the actual happening of it. So all this is happening quickly, okay? So chapter 4 happens very soon after chapter 3.
Esther 4. When Mordecai perceived all that was done, Mordecai rent his clothes, and put on sackcloth with ashes, and went out into the midst of the city, and cried with a loud and bitter cry, and came even before the king's gate, for none might enter into the king's gate clothed with sackcloth.
Now we do see here, Mordecai has known about this. Now Esther, again, she lives in the ivory palace. She doesn't know about the day-to-days. She's there to serve the king. She's the queen. She's got her own business. She doesn't have to deal with the common folk, so to speak. So she probably has no idea. Well, we know she doesn't know what's going on. We'll read about that in a moment. But we see Mordecai here. He is distraught over this. He even goes to the king's gate, but he can't get in because he's clothed in sackcloth in his mourning attire. Mourning, Mouring. Yeah, now that I said that, I've got morning attire. But anyway, and afternoon attire, and evening attire. Yeah, outside attire. Anyway, you get the point. Mordecai gets new, and he is distraught. What are we going to do? Verse 3.
And in every province, whithersoever the king's commandment and his decree came, there was great mourning among the Jews, and fasting and weeping and wailing, and many lay in sackcloth and ashes.
So now this mourning has went throughout the entirety of the kingdom. You know, the word is getting out through these postal letters that have been sent. And again, you've got 11 months. You know, what would you do if you knew you had 11 months to live? Yeah. Right. Well, yeah. Yeah. But this great mourning was everywhere. But now notice verse 4 here.
So Esther's maids and her chamberlains came and told it her. Then was the queen exceedingly grieved, and she sent raiment to clothe Mordecai and to take away his sackcloth from him. But he received it not.
So once Esther realizes that her uncle Mordecai is in ashes and sackcloth, she sends him a new pair of clothes, but he doesn't put them on. Verse 5.
Then called Esther for Hatach, one of the king's chamberlains, whom he had appointed to attend upon her, and gave him a commandment to Mordecai, to know what it was and why it was.
So now Esther is sending out, she wants to know from Mordecai, what's going on? Why are you and all the others so distraught? What's happening?
So Hatach went forth to Mordecai unto the street of the city which was before the king's gate. And Mordecai told him of all that had happened unto him, and of the sum of the money that Haman had promised to pay to the king's treasuries for the Jews to destroy them. Also he gave him the copy of the writing of the decree that was given at Shushan to destroy them, to show it unto Esther, and to declare it unto her, and to charge her that she should go in unto the king, to make supplication unto him, and to make request before him for her people. And Hatach came and told Esther the words of Mordecai.
So, again, Esther has no idea what's happening. Why is my uncle out there in sackcloth and ashes and wailing at the king's gate, making a fool of himself? So, she sends Hatach with a change of clothes. Get clean. No, I can't. Well, she wants to know why. What's going on? So Mordecai fills in Hatach of what's happening, gives him a copy of the letter, takes it, says, show this to Esther. Take it. Make supplication. Again, Esther has an in to the king. She can stop this, which we're going to see here played out. She can stop this, and she at this point is the only one. But Hatach takes the letter back from Mordecai, gives it to Esther, and verse 11.
Again Esther spake unto Hatach,
10.
and gave him commandment unto Mordecai. All the king's servants and all the people of the king's provinces do know that whosoever, whether man or woman, shall come unto the king into the inner court, who is not called, there is one law of his, to put him to death, except such to whom the king shall hold out the golden scepter, that he may live. but I have not been called to come in unto the king these 30 days. And they told to Mordecai Esther's words.
Now, I misspoke earlier. This was Esther's reply back to Mordecai. Essentially, I can't just go into the king. I mean, I got to be called. I looked at this like, well, we'll make any excuse we have to, Now, again, Esther's penalty for going into the king uncalled would be her death. But she tells Mordecai, nobody can go into the king unless they're called to come to the king. And I've not even been called. I've not even been and seen the king for 30 days. So it's not like that they have this day-to-day interaction as a husband and wife, that she hasn't even been and seen him for 30 days. Now, keep in mind, he has a harem, and who knows what's going on here. But Esther says, I've not even... So for me to just show up and walk in, well, that's impossible. I can't do that. So Mordecai gets word that Esther's kind of scared about doing this because she's not been called. She's not even seen him for 30 days. And who knows what his reaction will be if I just show up unannounced. But verse 13.
Then Mordecai commanded to answer Esther, Think not with thyself that thou shalt escape in the king's house, more than all the Jews.
I like Mordecai's answer. We're all going to die if you don't do this. So, what are we going to do here? Now, if any of us are familiar at all with the story of Esther, we understand that she's in a tough spot here. Because if she goes and is turned away, she's automatically executed. Can you imagine that? The penalty for going in to see your husband, if he doesn't want to see you, is your death. I mean, at least Vashti was just banished. So you can understand Esther's feelings here of, this ain't good on me. But as Mordecai says, you're dead one way or the other. It don't matter. That's what he says there in verse 11 or 13. You really think you're going to escape if you don't do this? Verse 14.
For if thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, then shall their enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. But thou and thy father's house shall be destroyed. And who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this?
So Mordecai is pointing out to Esther God's providence and sovereignty in all things. Why do you think you, above all the women of Persia, was chosen to be the queen, Esther? Perhaps you were chosen to be queen for this particular time right here. Are you going to rise up and grasp the ring that's in front of you, or are you just going to hide and be timid and not even try to do anything to save your people? And so looking back, when we read chapter 2 and we see how Esther was pleasing and gained favor with everyone that she come in contact with, we understand when we look here at verse 14 that she was seen in those eyes some years prior so that she could be chosen for such a time as this, to stand up for her people and to put a stop to the slaughter that's coming some 10 or 11 months from this point. And at this point, Esther is the only one that can change the decree. Or change the king's mind, I'll say. But again, Mordecai understands God's sovereignty and God's providence and says, you were chosen for this to be queen because of what's happening here. So, verse 15.
Then Esther bade them return Mordecai this answer. Go, gather together all the Jews that are present in Shushan, and fast ye for me, and neither eat nor drink 3 days, night or day. I also and my maidens will fast likewise, and so will I go in unto the king, which is not according to the law. And if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went his way, and did according to all that Esther had commanded him.
So Esther did make a request that everyone go and fast and pray for 3 days that when she goes to the king, she will be accepted. Obviously, at this point, we know that she was. But the fact is, Esther asked for this 3 days to prepare. And not only did she ask everyone to do this, but she herself participated in this fasting and prayer. And so it says there in verse 17 that Mordecai went and done as the queen asked him to do. And now, for next week, we will find out what happens next.